Hello everyone, Amy R here with Prairie Paper and Ink. This is my card for this week's Color Throwdown Challenge, of which I am the hostess. I will have a link to the challenge in my blog post, which will be linked directly below the video. So I did some very easy ink blending on the smooth side of distress watercolor paper. I just have it on my Waffle Flower water media mat because I like how the silicone kind of grabs the paper. And then I started off with dried Marigold Distress Oxide ink, and then I'm going to work in picked raspberry, and then I'm going to work in Seedless Preserves. And if you have not tried blending oxide inks on distress watercolor paper, I highly recommend it. I see it every once in a while in the forums and whatnot, people saying how they struggle with ink blending and that sort of thing. And specifically oxide inks, also the distress inks, so like the regular distress inks, if you work with them and experiment with them on distress watercolor paper, they're literally made to go together. I get the easiest blends with these, like takes no effort at all, literally. So I just worked in the colors and then kind of went back and forth, just, you know, working that blend between the colors. So I've got the marigold into the pink, into the purple, so which is my color combo, peach, pink, purple, and white. So of course I'm going to do some splattering, because the water effects and whatnot with oxide inks and regular distress inks is just fabulous. So I'm just picking up clean water with a paintbrush and then tapping it all over the background, adding quite a bit of water droplets because I love the effect. So I just kept tapping it and then I let it sit for not very long, like 20-30 seconds, something like that. Then I just pressed some paper towel into it to pick up that water, and you've got that fun splatter effect. Usually I would leave it here and then go on about everything else, but I wanted to add more splatter. I've been saying this in a lot of videos recently. Once I start doing the splatter again, I can't stop. So this time I'm just smushing those same Distress Oxide inks right onto the media mat. And then I'm going to add a little bit of water and then swirl it around with my paintbrush and then splatter those colors onto the background as well. It just gives it, you know, that little extra bit of like color and texture and all of that. So I started with, again, the dried marigold and then cleaned off my brush, mixed the picked raspberry with a bit of water, splattered that, and then did the Seedless Preserves at the very end. And then I'm going to set that background aside to dry, cleaned off my media mat. So then for my main kind of focus on this card, I'm using the Stylized Tulips wafer die from Simon Says Stamp. And I have it in my Platinum 6, and I did add a metal shim. Generally, you don't need a metal shim with a die like this. I think it cuts just fine. But I was cutting multiples, plus I wanted to make it easy to pop out the centers, because with this one, I just want the outline. And then I did that 3 times. So I die cut 3 outlines, and then I stack them together, and then I'll add it to my card later. For my sentiments, I'm using the Mom Word Mix 2 stamp set, which is one great big stamp. So I put some vellum in my MISTI stamping tool. I used my anti-static powder tool on the vellum, brushed off the excess, and then I inked up this stamp with clear embossing ink, and then just walked my fingers all over the stamp to make sure I stamped all these sentiments with that clear embossing ink, and it's going to grab the vellum. Doesn't matter that my magnet's there, it's going to just pull it off anyway, which is fine. And then I'm going to coat this with Simon's Detail White embossing powder. So coat all of these sentiments with that embossing powder. I'm going to tap off the excess, and then I'm going to melt these with my heat tool. This is the new Wagner heat tool. I didn't do a separate video on it, but people have noticed it's different than the other one I've been using. It is nice. If you have the other Wagner heat tool, you don't need this one. I didn't need this one either. I just wanted to get it. I was curious. So I finally pulled it out of the box. It's literally been sitting here for months. I ordered it back in the fall or whenever. I don't remember. And it's just been sitting in the box in my office for literal months. And I was like, why not? So I pulled it out and I've been just using it the last, you know, couple weeks or whatever it's been. And it is nice. I could do a dedicated video on it if you guys want and like compare it to the other one, etc. And of course there's a loud truck going by. Anyway, but yeah, it's great. So I pulled out my Platinum 6 again. And this time I don't need the metal shim, I just need my cutting plates. So I die cut those sentiments with the coordinating Word Mix 2 wafer die. And then I actually pulled out a second piece of vellum and I die cut it again. So I have just coordinating little extra die cuts because of course I'm going to layer them because I'm back on that kick again. So I just die cut all that and then I'm just going to set those aside because while I have my die cut machine sitting here, I'm going to die cut the background. The background is now completely dry. So I'm just going to die cut it with one of the basic rectangles wafer dies because I just want it to be slightly smaller than my A2 card front. So I quickly die cut that, and then I can get my die cut machine out of the way. So for the sentiment, since I die cut the second layer of vellum, I'm just going to run this large circle one through my little Xyron 3-inch sticker maker. And then I like to use my Teflon bone folder to run it all around the very edge of whatever I've run through my sticker maker. And then also to press down really well to make sure the adhesive is really adhered to the back of my piece of whatever I'm using. In this case, it's vellum. And then I added that second little circle to the back of that. It just gives it... I wasn't as concerned about making the vellum more opaque. It was more to give it a little bit more weight since I planned on popping this up with a bit of foam tape. So did that, set it aside. Now I want to work on the inside of my card. So I have the tulip background stamp that I used in a previous video that I'm still kind of obsessed with. So I pulled that out and my card base, which is a top folding A2 sized card. And I'm just going to use some Post-it tape to mask off right where the fold line is. And then that way I can also use the Post-it tape to hold this card base down in my MISTI. I removed the foam from my MISTI because this is a red rubber on cling foam stamp. And then I'm inking up the stamp with that same dried marigold Distress Oxide ink. And then I'm going to stamp that so it's going to cover the inside of the card. But I still wanted to bring in the pink and the purple as well, just to kind of tie it all together. So what I ended up doing is pulling out my splat box for this splatter, just to kind of prevent some of it from getting everywhere. I ended up with it all over. It's all over my hands. It's all over my desk. Whatever. Still pulled out my splat box though, and I just used a scrap piece of paper and attached it to the Post-it tape just to protect the rest of the inside of the card. And then I just smushed the picked raspberry and the the Seedless Preserves Distress Oxide inks right on my work surface. Added a little bit of water, swirled it with my paintbrush, and then just splattered that on the inside of the card. So I've got the tulip background stamped with the dried marigold, and then I have the pink and purple splatters just to kind of tie it all together. So I let those dry, peeled off that Post-it tape mask and the scrap paper I was using. And then I'm going to add some more of the Xyron adhesive to a couple more pieces of the vellum, one of the sentiments and the coordinating size. And I just had enough of this. This was the very last little bit in this sticker maker, which FYI, these ones are recyclable, like all the pieces. You can pull it all apart and all the pieces are recyclable. So I do have a backup of these because I use them quite a bit. But yeah, very, very last smidge just fit. So I coated both of these pieces of vellum with the Xyron adhesive, and then I stacked them together, and then I just had to press it on the inside of the card since I'd ran the just plain piece of vellum through as well. So that completes the inside of the card. So now to finish the outside of the card, I have my Stylized Tulips that I stacked 3 layers deep, and I had just stacked them with the craft tacky glue. And then I just added little dots, little tiny dots and lines here and there to the back of this. It doesn't need very much. And then I'm going to adhere this to the background I created. And I ended up flipping this around and having the purple on the bottom. The way I had blended it was how I originally intended it to be, but then, I don't know, it's funny how you just kind of change your mind. So I adhered that to the background. And I just used some of my acrylic blocks to like hold it down to make sure the adhesive stuck. And then for the sentiment, I used a couple of thin 3D foam squares on the side that's kind of hanging over the tulip. And then just a little bit more of that craft tacky glue on the actual tulip to adhere the sentiment to. And then put the acrylic blocks on that again just to hold it in place. And then I'm going to adhere this to my card base with more craft tacky glue. And then once that's adhered, as always, you could leave it here, but I wanted to add just a little bit of bling, nothing too crazy, because I liked how the background and the white really set everything off. But I went through my stash and I pulled out my Doris, these are like the iridescent crystal sequins. I have the large ones and the medium ones. I'll have a link to them. But I pulled out a few of these, and I'm just going to adhere these into place with the craft tacky glue and my little embellishment wand. And they just they're just subtle, nothing too crazy, and they've got like almost like a pink reflect. You can see it there with them in the tray. They just have this nice, like, yeah, pink reflect to them. So just put down little tiny dabs of the craft tacky glue and then press the sequins into place. And then once these are adhered, this card is complete. So like I mentioned, I will have a link below the video to my blog post. I'll have all the info in my blog post, the pictures, the link to the color throwdown challenge, the supplies, etc. I'll have a supply list. I'll link to everything I use, so you can check that out below if you were interested. Thank you all so much for watching and subscribing and thumbs upping and commenting. I really appreciate it, and I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye!